Hi guys, welcome back to Math with Mitchell, and today we're going to be going over definitions and why you need to define your terms and arguments to make them more effective and persuasive, and for your audience to understand also why you're using the word you're using, and just to clear things up in general. So first, why do we sort of need to use definitions in the English language and things like that? A good example is the word felt, which most of the time you don't really see this because felt is really good at sort of defining its term by itself, because it's one meaning in a verb and one meaning in a noun. And so depending on your context in your sentence, you sort of naturally know what it means. But it actually has two different meanings. The first one being like felt, like the material on your clothes. So if you walked into like a clothes shop and I was like, and you're like, I want a felt sweatshirt, it would mean different than I want to feel in the past tense, which is the other definition. Like I felt, I don't know, this felt this sweatshirt that was felt. So you could use the word two different ways. So that's sort of why you need to define your definitions, or you need to define the definitions of your terms so people understand what you mean, and so they're not confused, and it creates side arguments to your original arguments. So you can use these six different uh, types of defining, or strategies for defining your definitions during an argument. The first is relationship, and that's kind of a, a an effective one, but you also need to be careful about your audience. Sometimes your audience can not understand your relationship. So a good example is bald. So the word bald, you can say having no hair is a good example because you're using other terms to define your term. But if they don't understand what the term hair means, which is probably not going to be an example, probably not going to be an issue. But say if it was more complex, then you got to be careful to make sure that they also catch your relationship. Make sure they can make the connection. Next is lexical arguments. This is mainly to reduce ambiguity, which means that you need to basically reduce the unknown factor, or like sort of like this is a sort of what felt. This is a situation where felt, or you would eliminate the ambiguity with felt, where it could be two different definitions. So lexical arguments take out sort of the definition or an unclear definition. And this is kind of really important because you don't want the situation where you're talking about felt, and you're trying to debate whether the clothing material is valid, but the person keeps thinking that you're saying feel in the past tense. So reducing that ambiguity is pretty key, and so you can basically define your terms using strategies to reduce the ambiguity. That's sort of like an overarching type of definition is reducing, or by saying, hey, it's not this, it's that. Next is precise or precision definitions. These definitions basically are very similar to lexical definitions in that they try to reduce vagueness in your definition. So if say like a word like felt has multiple different definitions, they'll precisely choose one of them, and they do it in a different way that lexical arguments do. But overall, they basically choose one definition and hammer that into the word, so that in the whole argument, when they think of that word, they're like, okay, it's got to be this definition. All right, and then stipulative arguments are the next, or definitions, not arguments. Definitions are the next, and that's sort of a unique one in that whenever you create a new word, you need to also define it. So stipulative stipulative definitions define a new word. Sometimes you can use them to define a new meaning to a word. That's sometimes common. So say if you're using felt in a new type, like you basically redefine felt to mean something else, like you name a tree felt, and you're trying to define that, trying to define the term felt, in that it means the that's the type of tree. That's sort of just an example. You wouldn't really do that, but um, basically, if you're creating a new word or term, you need to define the definition. So define definition for that term, and that's you gotta be very specific, because most of the time you're defining new terms. So most of the time your audience is not gonna know that definition off the top of their head. So you gotta make sure you make that clear to them. The next is theoretical definitions, which is basically you're basically creating a new term for the same object, because it's a theoretical object or theoretical concept. So you can create a new term for it, sort of like how water is a good example. So we know what water is, and we've used that word for a long time throughout languages, and but you can also define it as H2O, which H2O, people don't go around saying H2O, 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 but it's the it's the same thing. So theoretical, that theoretical term sort of helps chemists, to understand the material, but it's not a common use of you don't replace that word with water. Be like, hey, I want some H2O. It just helps the theoretical aspect of the object. So you got to sort of define which one you're going to use and why you're using it. The last is persuasive. Persuasive definitions are basically how you word an object to sort of make it persuasive to your audience. So by adding more adjectives and being the innocent children type definition, where you're going to one extreme and you're defining the term in that extreme, which can be really is sometimes it's used a lot in the media today, and is very effective in connecting the argument to the person's personal emotions. But be careful, because you don't want to go too far, because just don't go too far. But persuasive definitions are very persuasive.